The prize ship is secured alongside. The merchant crew is being moved to the far rail. The fighting lasted maybe 20 minutes, and now the hard part begins. Not the boarding, not the battle, the count. Every man on that pirate ship knows what is in the hold. Some of them fought harder than others. Some took wounds. One lost 2 fingers to a boarding axe before the merchant crew surrendered. The quartermaster is already moving toward the cargo hatch with a lantern in one hand and a ledger in the other. Below that deck, there are chests, bolts of cloth, barrels of spirits, and maybe enough silver coin to make the whole voyage mean something. Every one of those men is armed. Every one of them is watching, and every one of them is doing the same quiet calculation in his head. He knows what he thinks he deserves. He is wondering whether the man next to him is thinking the same thing. And he is wondering whether the numbers in that ledger are going to match what he saw go into the hold. This is the moment most people never think about when they imagine pirate life. The fight is over, but the danger is not. Welcome to Deadman's Shore. I am Jack, and if you are new here, this channel covers the real history behind the pirate world, not the movie version. Subscribe if you want more, and drop a comment below. Would you have trusted the man next to you to count that cargo honestly? Because that question is exactly what this entire system was built around. Now back to the hold. The popular version of pirate treasure goes something like this. A ship is taken, the chest is cracked open, and gold coins are handed around like party favors. The captain gets a big share because he is the captain. The rest of the men get whatever is left. Everyone drinks rum, and the voyage continues. Simple. Romantic. Almost completely wrong. The real division of stolen wealth on a pirate ship was one of the most structured and genuinely dangerous processes in the entire pirate operation. It was not a celebration. It was a controlled transaction between armed men who all had a legitimate reason to believe they were owed something, and who all had the tools to argue that point with violence if the process failed them. Here is the actual problem. A pirate crew was not a team of friends. It was a collection of men drawn from wrecked naval careers, failed merchant voyages, desperate colonial ports, and sheer lack of options. They chose piracy together in the sense that they signed the same articles and sailed the same ship. But that did not make them loyal to each other. It made them contractual partners in a criminal enterprise. And in any partnership where the stakes are high and no legal system offers protection, the question of how to divide the profits is where everything either holds together or explodes. Think about what you are actually dealing with. A ship with anywhere from 60 to 300 men, depending on the vessel and the period. Every one of them experienced with weapons. Most of them have already demonstrated a willingness to use violence when they feel wronged. There is no court they can appeal to, no labor law, no outside authority to settle a dispute about whether the gunner was shorted on his share. If the division goes wrong, the only recourse is force. And force on a crowded ship at sea tends to end badly for everyone involved. So why did it not collapse? Why did pirate crews manage to take prizes, divide the goods, and keep sailing instead of tearing themselves apart every time a profitable ship crossed their path? The answer is not that pirates were secretly honorable men. The answer is that they built a system, a real one, a written one. One that was agreed to before the voyage began, signed by every man on board, and enforced by the one officer whose entire job was to make sure no single person, including the captain, walked away with more than his articles guaranteed. Almost every serious pirate crew operating during the golden age of piracy, roughly the 1690s through the 1730s, sailed under a document called articles. Sometimes called a charter party, The exact language varied by crew. But what these documents were in practical terms was a written contract with specific numbers in it, signed by each crew member before the ship left port. They spelled out exactly who got paid what under what conditions, and what happened to you if you violated the terms. We know this because some of those documents survived. The articles attributed to Bartholomew Roberts, who operated primarily in the Atlantic and Caribbean between roughly 1719 and 1722, are among the most detailed examples historians have. They were captured along with his crew after Roberts was killed in battle, and brought forward as evidence during the Admiralty trials at Cape Coast Castle in 1722. The court record preserved them, and what they describe is not a pirate party. It is a workplace contract with teeth. Roberts' articles set out exactly how prizes were to be divided. Every man had a vote in major decisions. The captain received 2 full shares of any prize. The master received 1.5. The doctor, the boatswain, the gunner, and the carpenter each received 1.25. Every common sailor received 1 full share. The numbers were fixed, publicly known, and non-negotiable once they were signed. Nobody got to renegotiate after the prize was in hand. Now, you might read that and think the captain got a pretty good deal, 2 shares, when everyone else got 1. But here is the part that changed everything. On a Royal Navy vessel or a merchant ship, the captain represented the owners and took whatever portion of profit the owners decided. The crew got wages, not shares. Fixed pay regardless of the voyage's success. The captain's authority over that money was absolute and came from ownership and law. On a pirate ship, the captain had none of that. He got 2 shares because he was trusted to make tactical decisions in battle and to take the personal and legal risk of command, not because he owned the enterprise. The crew gave him that right in writing before they sailed. The moment they believed he was abusing it, they had a legitimate and widely exercised option to take it back. Here is where the quartermaster becomes the most important person on that ship, and probably the most underrated figure in the entire history of piracy. On a Royal Navy vessel, a quartermaster helped with navigation and steering, a fairly technical and subordinate role. On a pirate ship, the quartermaster was the elected representative of the crew. His job was to act as a check on the captain's power, to manage the distribution of prize goods, to maintain the ship's accounts, and to ensure the articles were followed by everyone, including the officers. If the captain wanted to take an action the crew disagreed with, it was the quartermaster who called for a vote. If there was a dispute about shares, the quartermaster resolved it. If someone was found hiding goods from the common pile, the quartermaster handled the punishment. The separation of roles was deliberate. The captain had tactical authority in battle and navigation, but he did not control the money. The quartermaster controlled the money, and the quartermaster answered to the crew, not to the captain. This structure does not exist in any other maritime organization of the period. It was a pirate invention, born from the practical reality that you cannot give one person control of both military force and financial distribution among armed men who owe loyalty to no state. When a prize was taken, the quartermaster led the search party into the hold. He inventoried everything: coin, cargo, provisions, weapons, navigational instruments, anything of tradable worth. The inventory was then read to the crew, not secretly tallied and announced later. Read out, on deck, in front of everyone, so every man could do his own arithmetic about what his share should look like. This transparency was not a courtesy, it was a survival mechanism. Because the single most dangerous thing that could happen during a prize division was not a fight about the numbers. It was a suspicion that the numbers were wrong. Suspicion spread through a pirate crew the way heat spread through a hull in the Caribbean summer. It did not need to be confirmed to be dangerous. If 12 men believed the captain had quietly moved something into a private pocket before the count, the entire social contract of that ship began to fracture. So the public inventory was one of the most important procedures in the whole operation. It was not about trust. It was about removing the conditions under which distrust could grow. Coin was the easiest part of the actual division. Silver and gold could be weighed, counted, and divided directly by the share fractions in the articles. But coin was often not the majority of what was taken. Cargo was the majority. Cloth, sugar, tobacco, dyewood, naval stores, spices, manufactured goods. None of that was immediately divisible among 150 men. You could not hand each man his fractional share of a bolt of linen or a barrel of indigo. This is where a second layer of the operation came into play. Cargo had to be converted into money, which meant the crew needed buyers, which meant the crew needed ports, and which meant the value of any given prize was not what it was worth on the open market. It was what a fence, a corrupt merchant, or a willing colonial trader would pay for it quietly, in a port where nobody asked where the goods came from. The price was always lower than the real value, sometimes dramatically lower. A cargo worth £10,000 sterling in a London merchant house might bring 1,500 in a Caribbean trading post, where the buyer charged a silence premium accordingly. This was the expected operating cost of doing criminal business in a world that officially wanted you hanged. The articles assumed it. The shares were calculated against whatever actual cash the crew received, not theoretical market values nobody would ever pay them. But this created a specific vulnerability. Who decided what price was acceptable for the cargo? Who negotiated with the buyer? And how did the crew know the number they were told was the real number? Again, the answer was the quartermaster. He negotiated the sale, received the payment, and reported the number publicly. But he was not working alone. In many documented cases, the crew sent a small party ashore with the goods, multiple witnesses to the transaction who could confirm or contest the final figure. Another layer of mutual surveillance built into the process, because the process could not afford to rely on any single person's honesty. The articles also dealt with a problem most people think of as purely modern. What happens if you get hurt on the job? Injury compensation in pirate articles was specific, written, and pre-agreed before the first shot was fired. Roberts' articles included a formal table of payouts for wounds taken in battle. The loss of a right arm was compensated at 600 pieces of 8, a left arm 500, a right leg 500, a left leg 400, an eye 100, a finger 100. These payments came directly out of the common fund before any individual shares were calculated, which meant the cost of crew injury was treated as a collective cost, not the individual wounded man's problem. If you lost your hand boarding that ship, you were not left to manage on a reduced share while the healthy men collected full portions. The articles acknowledged that some men paid more with their bodies, and that acknowledgement had a specific cash value attached to it, more formalized than almost anything the Royal Navy offered a common sailor who lost a limb in service. Now, here is the thing that every single layer of this system was ultimately protecting against: theft from the common pile. In the articles of most well-documented pirate crews, stealing from the common prize before it was officially divided was one of the most serious offenses a man could commit. It was not just taking money. It was telling every other man on that ship that the agreement protecting him from being cheated did not actually apply to you. Roberts' articles stated that any man who defrauded the company of even one piece of 8 in plate, jewels, or money was to be marooned. Not flogged, not fined. Marooned. Left on a coast or sandbar with a pistol, powder, and shot, and nothing else. The message was unambiguous. The common pile was sacred. Not for moral reasons, for operational ones. Men were expected to declare anything valuable they had personally taken from a prize before the official inventory was completed. If a sailor found a bag of coin during the boarding and tucked it away, and the quartermaster found it later through the search of quarters the articles permitted, the punishment ranged from loss of share to marooning. What came off a prize belonged to the whole crew until the articles said otherwise. Here is where the myth really falls apart. People imagine pirate ships as places of radical individual freedom, and in some ways, they were more democratic than almost any vessel in the Atlantic world at that time. But that democracy had hard limits enforced with real consequences. A pirate could vote on the next target or whether to replace his captain. A pirate could not help himself to goods from a prize before the count was done. The freedom was structural. Freedom from naval hierarchy and fixed wages. It was not freedom to steal from the men betting their lives on the same voyage. The captain's position in all of this is one of the most consistently misunderstood aspects of how pirate ships functioned. In the popular version, the pirate captain is a king who makes all the calls. In reality, he held a position that was powerful in battle and precarious everywhere else. He had tactical authority when fighting and navigating, and his orders in those moments were followed without debate. But the moment the battle ended and the prize was alongside, his authority contracted sharply. He could not order a division different from what the articles specified, and if the crew believed he was trying to, they voted him out. Captains were replaced by crew vote more often than most popular histories acknowledge, some for tactical failures, some for excessive violence, some for suspected dishonesty around prize division. When it happened, it was usually not a dramatic mutiny. It was often a formal proceeding, announced, voted on, and completed. The deposed captain sometimes continued sailing on his own former ship as a common sailor, which tells you something real about both the practical nature of the process and the genuine authority the articles gave the crew over their own leadership. The records from pirate trials during the 1720s give us glimpses of what happened when the system bent under pressure. Men who testified at trial sometimes described internal conflicts that had nothing to do with naval engagement. Arguments over shares, accusations of concealed goods, and threats made around what should have been routine divisions. The friction inside pirate crews around money was real, constant, and the thing the whole system was designed to absorb without turning lethal. Luxury items taken from prizes were a consistent flashpoint. A chest of jewelry could not be fairly divided among 120 men. Neither could a fine navigational clock or a piece of silver plate. These were typically set aside, sold at the next opportunity, and the proceeds added to the common fund. Clothing was a related issue. Roberts' articles explicitly stated that keeping clothing taken from prizes for personal use without routing it through the common fund was punishable. A good coat or a pair of boots had real resale value in port, and allowing men to keep them privately was allowing them to skim value from the common fund one item at a time. Here is a question worth sitting with. If you had been a common sailor on one of these ships, would you have trusted the count? Knowing about the quartermaster, the public inventory, and the punishment for hidden goods, would you have believed the number when it was finally read out on deck? Leave that in the comments. The honest answer depended entirely on which crew you were sailing with and how many prizes they had already divided without incident. The injury compensation system created its own pressures worth being clear about. It was drawn from the common fund before individual shares were calculated, which meant that a battle where many men were wounded reduced every other man's share. Every payout for injury, ship repairs, or provisions in a neutral port came out of what the men would otherwise divide personally. The articles were generous toward the wounded because the crew collectively chose to be, not because the money appeared from nowhere. This also makes the comparison to modern working arrangements surprisingly direct. The pirate articles were, in functional terms, a combination of an employment contract, a profit-sharing agreement, a basic injury compensation schedule, and a code of conduct with defined penalties. The men who signed them were negotiating the terms of a dangerous shared project before committing to it. Their leverage was not a union or a labor board. It was the option to shoot you. A pirate ship that was not taking prizes was a ship full of men accumulating risk with no income. When the hunting was dry, the pressure on the share system inverted. Instead of dividing new wealth, the crew was consuming provisions, wearing out the ship, and getting closer to the day when the articles felt like a document promising something that was never going to arrive. Some crews pushed aggressively for the next prize, taking targets they might otherwise have avoided. This raised the casualty rate, which reduced shares through the injury fund, which increased the pressure further. Several documented pirate voyages fell into exactly this cycle in their final months. Bartholomew Roberts is a useful case, not because his career is typical, but because the documentation around it is unusually detailed. He operated for roughly 3 years and took somewhere between 400 and 470 prizes, depending on whose accounting you trust. But the Admiralty records and trial testimony suggest that his later voyages were marked by growing internal friction, reduced market access for prize cargo, and increasingly organized naval opposition deployed specifically to find him. The system was working. The world around it was closing. When Roberts was killed by a broadside from HMS Swallow off the coast of West Africa in February 1722, his crew was taken to Cape Coast Castle and tried. Out of roughly 169 men brought before the court, 54 were condemned and hanged, one of the largest piracy executions of the entire Golden Age. The articles that had been designed to keep those men from killing each other became the documents that helped convict them. Every man who had signed them had put his name on proof that he knew exactly what he was part of. There is a grim practicality in that, and it tells you something real about the limits of the pirate system. The articles were effective at solving the internal problem. They managed the danger of dividing wealth among armed men in a small space under constant stress, reduced internal violence, and created a functioning framework for resolving disputes without murder. But the articles could not protect the men from the external consequences of what they were doing. They could not keep ports open as imperial pressure increased. They could not keep the Admiralty from finding the ships. And they could not stop the courts from using the articles themselves as the instrument of conviction. The share system worked exactly as designed until the conditions that made it possible no longer existed. The surviving accounts come mostly from Admiralty trials, from the journal of Captain Charles Johnson, whose 1724 work on piracy is invaluable but selectively reliable, and from merchants who reported what they witnessed to colonial authorities. None of these sources are neutral, but together they build a picture, and the picture is not of celebration. It is of men working a system under pressure. The quartermaster moving through the hold with a lantern, recording items by lamplight. The list read aloud on deck. Men listening and running the arithmetic against what the articles promised. The deductions for injury claims, for ship repairs, for provisions. The final share numbers announced. And then, if everything had been done correctly, an uneasy and temporary peace settled over the deck. Not happiness, not triumph. Relief that the count was over without a blade coming out. You are standing on that deck when the final number is read. Your share comes out to roughly 65 pieces of 8 after deductions. Not a bad return for a month at sea, especially when a merchant sailor earned maybe 3 or 4 pounds sterling for the same period, with no share in any profit. But 65 pieces of 8 is only useful when you can spend it. And spending it means port. And port, for a pirate crew in 1720, means a very specific kind of place, because most legitimate harbors would arrest you on sight. The need for safe ports was the external vulnerability that no set of articles could solve internally. Nassau had been brought back under British authority by Governor Woodes Rogers in 1718, closing the most reliable pirate port in the Caribbean. Ports that had quietly traded in pirate prizes were being pressured by governors with actual naval vessels behind them. The fence networks that converted stolen cargo into clean money were contracting. When a port got nervous, prize values collapsed. Higher buyer risk meant lower prices. Lower prices meant smaller shares. And smaller shares meant men who had risked everything, walking away with less than the articles implied. Not because anyone in the crew cheated, but because the world outside the ship had changed. This is the cost nobody includes in the adventure version of pirate history. The articles were sophisticated at solving the internal problem, but they could not make piracy financially sustainable as imperial governments got organized. They could not keep ports open or buyers willing, and they could not keep the Admiralty from presenting those same articles in court as the clearest possible evidence of deliberate, continuous criminal enterprise. And so we come back to that prize ship alongside at the start. The merchant crew is at the rail. The quartermaster is in the hold with his lantern. The inventory is being assembled line by line. Every man on the pirate ship is waiting for his number. The process about to happen was not invented because pirates were idealistic about equality. It was invented because the alternative was chaos. And chaos on a ship at sea meant everyone died or everyone got caught, usually both. The articles, the shares, the public inventory, the injury compensation table, the quartermaster's independent authority, the punishment for hidden goods. All of it existed for one reason. These men needed each other to survive, and they knew it. The man standing next to you with a cutlass might be the man who drags you out of a flooding compartment tomorrow. You do not cheat that man. Not because you trust him, because you need him. If you made it this far, Deadman's Shore is the channel for exactly this kind of history. Hit subscribe and the bell if you want to keep going deeper into what the real maritime world behind the stories actually looked like. The number is finally read. Your share is announced. The man beside you exhales slowly. Nobody reaches for a blade. Not tonight. The process held. That is what kept a ship full of armed criminals from destroying itself on the way home. Not honor between thieves. Not rum and songs about the sea. A written contract, a public count, and one man with a lantern and a ledger who answered to every single person on that crew and knew exactly what would happen to him if the numbers did not add up.